Welcome to the next edition of Study Skills That Work. As I'm sure you know, Mr. Hefner's English class requires that you experiment with a number of new study techniques. Today we're going to be talking about how to make Cornell notes. As we've already talked about, you know that it's important to understand how our brains work if you're going to learn and remember. And one of the principles about how we learn is that we remember what we think about. If we want to remember something, we have got to think about it. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. It's a fact of life that thinking is hard work, and many of us would do almost anything to avoid hard work. And to make things even worse, Cornell notes require thinking, and we know that thinking is hard work. So if Cornell notes require more work, why would you use Cornell notes? Well, the answer to that is because you will understand and remember more from every lesson. Cornell notes are not for the slacker. Cornell notes are for the student who wants to get ahead. Cornell notes are for the student who's looking to succeed in the class and is willing to go that extra mile in order to do so. Nobody takes perfect Cornell notes the first time he tries. The fact is you get better and better the more you use them, and it's going to feel a little uncomfortable at first as you're trying out something new. But let's just go over the basics of how to create a Cornell note sheet from start to finish. The first time you look at a Cornell note sheet, it may look pretty complicated and the task rather daunting. But when you get right down to it, there are only 4 parts to the Cornell note sheet, and only 3 of them are super important. The first part is just a lot of information about the course. This is so you can organize your notes and come back to them later. The next part is the most important part. This is what we're going to call telegraphic notes. These are the parts of the notes that you're going to take during class while the teacher's generally in front of the room or while you're reading an article. The next part is going to be completed after class, and this is your cues column. We'll talk about this in just a moment. And finally, there's the summary portion. In our class, what we're going to do is we're going to use this to answer the essential lesson question. Let's start off by taking a look at the information that you're always going to put at the top of every Cornell note sheet. This information is going to include your name, the class you're taking, the unit of study that we're currently working on, the topic, which will be the lesson topic for that day only, and then finally, the lesson essential question, which will always be provided to you by the teacher. Let's fill that information in right now for a sample lesson. All right, here's a Cornell note sheet with all of the essential information created at the top. We have the name of the student, we have the date of the lesson, which helps to organize the notebook, the course, so that if you're using Cornell notes in more than one class, you know where they belong, the unit of study, and of course the topic for the day. The lesson essential question will be provided to you by the teacher. This is important to keep in mind as you take notes, because your goal for each lesson will be to construct an answer with details to that lesson essential question. Now, here's where we're going to get into sort of what you might call the meat of the lessons. This is going to be your telegraphic notes. And this is part of the Cornell notes that you're probably used to taking. If you've been sitting in a class watching a teacher at the board and you copy down what the teacher writes, that's a good start to telegraphic notes. But I'm sure you've also noticed that it's quite easy to take notes without even paying attention. You write what the teacher's writing, and at the same time, you get to think of something else. So let's talk about the kinds of things you'll put in the telegraphic notes section. First, you'll want to make sure that you write down anything that is emphasized by the teacher. If the teacher writes a word on the board, copy that word. If a teacher writes a sentence, copy it. If a teacher repeats something, copy that too. Your goal in the telegraphic notes section is to keep up with the class, and so you want to use words, phrases, sketches, Don't worry about using complete sentences, proper spelling, or punctuation. We'll worry about that later. The last thing you want to worry about is during the final part of each class. Take some time to go back and look at those words, phrases, and sketches that you've written down. And now, from memory, fill in all the details. Complete your sentences. Add more explanation. Anything that you think you might forget later on, get it on the page now while it's fresh in your mind. The important thing about this is you're being forced to think about what's important. You're being forced to think about those things that just happened in the class that you didn't get time to put on your notes. And now that you've finished up your telegraphic notes, you can put them away for the end of class. But you're not finished yet. What you're going to do is sometime that same evening, within hours, you want to get out your notes, and now you want to move to the cues column. Now the cues column is the place where you're going to list words, phrases, ideas, things that are going to help you study. I'll give you some examples. One of the things you might do is list key vocabulary in the cues column. Your definitions should already be part of the telegraphic notes, and if you list the vocabulary words to the left, you'll be able to cover up the telegraphic notes, look at the cues column, and see if you can remember from memory. Then you uncover the telegraphic notes and see if you had the word right. You can also use the cues column to list ideas and thoughts. You can even react to the things that happened in class. The idea here again is to make yourself think. You might even ask yourself a question such as, so what? What does it mean? Why did the teacher go over something? If you put that here in the cues column, it forces you to think for the second time about the very things you did in class. From time to time, there may be things that happen in class that you don't completely understand. And so that might be the time when you actually want to ask yourself a question. This could be something that you ask for yourself so you can use it to study later on, or it could be something that you want to follow up with the teacher with the next day. And finally, you might also want to list some connections. How does what you did today in class connect to what you did yesterday, or last week, or maybe even something in another subject field? The truth is, it doesn't completely matter what you put in the cues column, as long as what you put there makes you think. And so this brings us to the final part of the Cornell note sheet, and that is going to be the answer to today's lesson essential question. Your goal here again is to be thinking. In just one or two sentences, in other words, try to compress an entire lesson into the most important part. In just one or two sentences, answer the question, but use details whenever possible. If you can answer the question, making sure that you're using both details from the lessons and facts from the lessons, that shows that you understand the material. And if you can do it on Cornell Notes, you'll be able to do it on the exam as well. And so as we wrap this up, let's go over the keys to success on Cornell Notes just one final time. During class, you're going to take quick, telegraphic-style notes, words and phrases, keeping up with the teacher, trying to get everything that's emphasized without the details. Then, before you leave the classroom and while things are fresh in your mind, you want to add things, change things that might not be clear or correct, and fill in those details from your memory. Not too long after class, but sometime before all the material kind of like leaks out of your head, you want to return to your notes and start to create some cues. The cues are going to be things that will help you study later. Key vocabulary, questions about the material, maybe making connections between the material from this lesson and something else that you knew from another time. And finally, always remember to answer the lesson essential question in one or two sentences, trying to pack as much information into that as possible. Force yourself to summarize and to compact big ideas into small ones. Remember to use details and add facts as well. All of this leads up to the one main thing about Cornell Notes. They force you to think, and we remember what we think about